let's put the pedal to the metal. Let's talk about the UAW strike. So what's going on? This is going to be a long strike, folks. This is a very big deal, but so far the consequences aren't going to hurt too bad so far.
That's the good news for now.
But a lot is being said. You know, there are threats that it will last. They will close down other plants because right now, not all the plants are closed. Actually, only one plant at each automaker has been closed. So right now, there's only 12,700 UAW members, or less than 10% of the members that are on strike. So not all 145,000 members at the three companies have walked out simultaneously. That would bring operations to a complete grind. And it would also mean that the budget that can last, the union's budget that allows the union to be on strike, if every member is on strike at once, they can handle 11 weeks. 11 weeks, because each member needs to be paid $500. So that can last 11 weeks. This way, with only closing one factory, means they can be on strike for a whole lot more than 11 weeks. It means they can be on strike 10 times longer. So if they only keep one factory closed at a time, theoretically, they could be closed for roughly 100 weeks. So theoretically 2 years. So I think right now, the UAW is making a move to show that, hey, they can be on strike for an extremely long time if need be. However, closing factories can also force, Ford and GM to actually lay off people. And Ford and GM are going to be laying off people. Ford just laid off 600 people. We'll get to the exact reason why in a moment, but they're opening themselves up to being sued. When there's a strike going on, if you lay people off as a company, you're opening yourself up to some very serious and very costly lawsuits. But I think that helps demonstrate just how serious this is for the big three manufacturers, but it's also extremely serious for the UAW members because they have worked, they took pay cuts, they lost benefits back when everyone, Stellantis, back then, Dodge Ram. So 2008, 2009, the whole bankruptcy scare, GM and Stellantis essentially went bankrupt. Ford didn't go bankrupt because Ford had borrowed a whole lot of money previous. And Ford, again, right before this strike, borrowed, I think it's $9 billion. You'll want to fact check me on that, and you can put it in the comments section if you fact check me on that. But I believe they just recently borrowed, it's either $7 or $9 billion total. And the reason they cited is to be able to pay for all the new electric vehicle development, research and development, and building out of plants, because Ford, for example, is going to have Blue Oval City, 11,000 workers, 2 different sites. One of the sites is going to be 6 square miles so that they can produce batteries, recycle batteries, assemble vehicles. They want to be able to cover the whole process in and out at that one factory. A ton of jobs coming in. But that's the future, electric vehicles. It's a forced future. We'll get to that also in a minute because this is not a funny situation with what's going down. Electric vehicles are being forced on manufacturers and it's causing them to lose billions of dollars when it comes to EV production. The UAW is not thrilled because building electric vehicles means less jobs at those than you normally be required for the amount of vehicles produced. So this is serious enough that Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su and Gene Sperling, who's a top advisor to Biden, who has been monitoring talks for the administration, they headed out to talk to both sides last Friday. So they headed out to Detroit in hopes to help them reach a deal. Clearly, that didn't happen. And that's because there's a lot of politics actually going down. And let's hear from this guy right here, Mr. Fenn, the UAW president. So let's just see how, and this isn't just rhetoric. He's talking back to, he had 4 of his grandparents work at the big three, 3 of which retired from the big three. And he goes to even talk about how, there was the American dream in the 1930s. And he goes as far as saying that the American dream under current pay and benefits, that the American dream is dead. His words, not mine. So I think there's a lot of politics, because he's talking, really the way he's talking almost as if he's a politician who's representing almost a socialist movement. It almost looks like class warfare has broken down or broken into these negotiations. And I think there's extremely valid points on both sides, and I promise to do my best to give all the points for both sides. I'm not taking a side, but I think there's some realities we need to face and admit, and there's some pretty extreme things that we can say with some pretty good reasons to support them. So let's listen in for just a moment. So I think we need to raise the sound here. That's on me.
We're going to take care of our business. We have our demands. I'm not worried about the Biden administration right now. This is our job. This is our fight. This is the members. These members are out here. We're going to do what we got to do. So, we're going to take care of our business. We have our demands. We've been very clear about our demands. And if the companies don't come to the pump and deliver for these members and give them their fair share of economic and social justice, we'll amp up the pressure. We'll take more plants out.
Hey, Sean, will you take...
So there you have it. He's saying we'll take more plants out. And that's because these are the plants that are currently out. Not a big deal right now, actually. And, I'm surprised the major media didn't jump on the fact to really, say, hey, this isn't a big deal. They're taking it slow. This won't affect production very much. Because that's the way it appears right now. But I'd say, I don't think it's about the UAW president not wanting to cause much harm to the big three. I think that it's at the beginning of a strike. And I think he's showing his cards that he can have the strike go on for an extremely long period of time, causing a lot of media coverage, maybe a lot of customers who side more with the employees being upset. This will somewhat cut into the big three. But, the worst thing is it's a way of showing that theoretically, this will not last 2 years, but the budget is there. They've got what is it? They've got a lot of money. We'll get to the exact numbers to how much money the union has, but it's if I recall, it's right around $800 million. But the easy math is you take $500, you take the number of employees, 145,000 employees divided by 500, and well, that's times 500. That's the overall budget that they have. They can last for 11 weeks. So they didn't have all 3 companies go out simultaneously. They've selected one large assembly plant for each company. So in Toledo, you've got the Ohio company, Ohio Toledo, affecting Stellantis. Jeep production, you've got, and this is affecting the Jeep Wrangler at the Warren, Michigan. And you've got the Ford Bronco and Ford Ranger factory. And sorry, I've got those mixed up. You've got the factory is in Michigan for the Ford Bronco and Ford Ranger. So if you've ordered a Ford Ranger, this guy right here, you've got reason to worry. If you've ordered a Ford Bronco, you've got reason to worry because the Michigan factory is closed down. In Wentzville, Missouri for GM, that's affecting the Colorado. So if you've ordered a Colorado, right now, production is at 0 because that factory is on strike. So those plants employ 12,700 UAW members, or less than 10% of the overall members. So this could last a very long time. That's what the cards that they want to show in their hand right now. So the union insists that it's ready to expand the strike to other plants. So I can tell you behind closed doors, don't quote me on this, but I'll say that I've got a highly educated guess that it's been made very clear we can close down your truck factories. You know, the F-150, the 1500, the Ram truck. Those are the factories that make the big bucks. Right now, they went after the popular models, the models that are popular right now. People want their Broncos. People want their new model Ranger, but those aren't the biggest profit models, nor the highest volume models. The big money is on the big trucks. So they started off with a good punch, but not the biggest uppercut, because, well, that's the bargaining chip. That's the piece that says, hey, take us seriously. We can be nice. You know, they're showing that they can play nice. This is a pretty nice strike. If you look at it from a manufacturing perspective, it's like, wow, thank goodness they only closed the Ford Ranger, Ford Bronco factory, or if you're a GM, yeah, just the Colorado factory. So they're saying, thank goodness our big profit models aren't touched. At least that's what, obviously, they're hoping for. The UAW president is hoping gets perceived, but it also gives the message this can be a very long strike. I don't think Biden sending his aides is going to change. Really, it's not going to help anyone get to a conclusion to this problem anytime soon, because Ford, GM, and Dodge have a lot of inventory. They can handle a strike. They could handle zero production on all their vehicles. It would take about 2 months to empty out the dealership yards. And you know what? Buyers, consumers, are already used to ordering vehicles. So if the yards go back to zero, all I see happening is us buyers seeing, let's say right now, an F-150 EcoBoost engine on an XLT 302 2023 has $3,750 off. We could hope that within a few months, that type of promotion ends up on the 2024 once we've got a good selection of 2024 on the lots. However, I could see that rebate definitely disappearing as inventory disappears, which in the end, that's, Ford's money. GM and Stellantis all have pretty big. Stellantis has huge rebates because they've got the highest days in inventory. They're right around the 110 days of inventory mark, meaning at dealers, vehicles take on average 110 days to sell. And in another way, we can say their lots are full. The dealership lots at Stellantis are full. As a manufacturer, if some of that inventory goes down at dealers because less vehicles are coming in, some vehicles are obviously still going to get sold, even if they cut the rebates in half or remove them. In the case of Ford, a $3,750 rebate, if that goes down to even zero because selection goes down, that means more money in Ford's pocket. And it's putting sales off to later. Yes, they will lose some sales, but a lot of truck people, if you've always bought an F-150 truck or a GM or a Dodge, what are the chances you're going to all of a sudden go and pay top dollar at a very high interest rate a Tundra? You're going to lose some people, but I think you're going to make more money than people you lose.
And I guess the customer will be more affected right now would probably be the person who were supposed to have a Bronco or Raptor soon as getting scheduled. They will need to wait again, wait more. So it will hurt these customers more, I guess.
Yes, and Bronco customers are the customers that are the most excited for their product because let's face it, sorry, Jeep, the Bronco's better. And people are really excited to get it. And that's not just me saying this as a Ford guy. I am more of a Ford guy. I really, really like the Jeep Wrangler, but Bronco has picked up a lot of Jeep Wrangler customers. And you'll have people who've never test driven Bronco and just say it's horrible, but you also have a lot of people that used to own Jeep Wranglers who will say, wow, the Bronco's a lot better, and I'm so happy it's worth every dollar, and I'm thrilled that I got one. So that is sort of on a side note for a Bronco episode. Let's keep it to the UAW facts. I don't think President Biden isn't necessarily helping in this situation. I think he's sort of, you could say, strengthening the UAW fortifications. He's delivering cannonballs to the castle or to the battleship, whatever. If you're more of a Navy man, let's say battleship. So let's say we can say Biden's bringing some cannonballs to the battleship and is helping the UAW sort of beef up the confidence, because right here you can say, well, Biden took a very pro-union position when he said, quote, auto companies have seen record profits. That's true. Returning to the quote. So auto companies have seen record profits, including in the last few years, because of the extraordinary skill and sacrifices of UAW workers. But those record profits have not been shared fairly, in my view, President Biden says this, with those workers. Even went on to say that the automakers need to go further in their offers. So that is really helping this look like it's going to be, this beefs up, this gives them like full ammunition to feel like, hey, the president of the United States is on our side. We're going to make this happen. But it's not about whether it's fair or unfair, because really, I'll add my opinion here. It is unfair that back in 08, 09, that these guys took some major sacrifices so that GM, so that the three automakers don't go out of business. They made a huge sacrifice. And their sacrifice, I'd even would say, was heroic, because they chose to have less money, less well-being for their families, so that they could all continue working, and so that we could have these legacy automakers continue. And now that's exemplary, and I applaud them for that. But this isn't about what's fair or unfair. This is about figuring out what numbers work. Unfortunately, from the sounds of it, there's, it's how do you not have emotion in this? But I can tell you at work, we recently went through a renegotiation, and we got cutbacks, even though record profit years as a dealership, but as an employee, I saw cutbacks. And, we had to take the emotion out of it and say, okay, well, we need to look at this as the company surviving, doing well for the years to come. And there's a lot of money for dealers to get into the EV train. And there's a lot of money for the big manufacturers, the big three for all manufacturers, to survive. They've got to get on the electric bandwagon. And who's forcing the invention? Who invented the darn bandwagon? Well, it's President Biden. And that's not a political statement. It's not a criticism necessarily. It's a fact. We're in this situation right now because EV vehicles are being forced. If Ford, GM, and Stellantis didn't have to build a whole network, didn't have to build all the framework for these forced electric vehicles, yeah, they truly would have real record profit years, and they'd have a lot of money to dish out. But just like my dealership, and why I took a pay cut, is because I was like, yeah, I understand you need to put in about $1.5 million into the dealership. Just like these guys need to put in tens of billions of dollars in the next few years into the electric vehicle movement. Otherwise, they won't survive. And this isn't a rant. This is fact. Companies that don't meet your clean and safe requirement that's been created, and that's all about CO2 pollution. It's not about pesticide pollution. It's not about millionaire and billionaires' private jet pollution. It's not about plastic pollution. It's not about any number of the hundreds of deadly chemicals that get allowed into our food. It's not about how sugar is killing us through diabetes, heart problems, Alzheimer's, the crap diet that most of us can only afford. We can only afford the crap. Well, that crap is killing us. It's giving us dementia. It's giving us Alzheimer's. It's giving us health issues, heart attacks. Mm-hmm. I've seen it with my parents. It's giving us cancer. Pesticides. Is there anyone working to ban pesticides on front lawns or control the air conditioning temperature in homes or office buildings? You freeze to death in your office building.
All the time.
You freeze. Money wasted so that you can be unbelievably unpleasant and unhappy at work because your office building is freezing, and the government isn't talking about limiting, to say, hey, 16 degrees or 18 degrees Celsius or, 55 or 60 Fahrenheit doesn't make sense. Let's cap everyone at a nice balmy 80 degrees or whatever temperature, but just to make sure that there isn't energy being wasted on freezing people. No, there's no work towards that. What's being worked towards is saying that we're all going to go extinct because CO2 is currently at 0.04% of the atmosphere. And at its lowest point, it was at 0.03. And you know what? At 0.02, if we go a hundredth of a fraction below 0.02 carbon in the atmosphere, all plants die, and essentially we also face extinction. So apparently on this planet, with primates living on it, we've been above 0.04% CO2 in the atmosphere before. But the current political, and you can say that I'm crazy thinking that there is an agenda at play, but it's funny how most countries get on board so easily in saying, yeah, we agree that the increased CO2 will end all life on Earth, so we have to have electric vehicles. And if the solution made sense, I wouldn't hold this opinion. But there's a lot of pollution to create electric vehicles, and most of the networks across the globe aren't creating clean energy. And they're not creating clean electricity. And in last week's episode, we even talked about how the European Union doesn't accept Porsche's synthetic fuel, which takes CO2 out of the atmosphere and turns it into a fuel, so that then when it burns and creates CO2, let's say you take 100 units of CO2 out of the atmosphere and you put 100 units back in, we'd say you're at 0 units other than the electricity used to create that synthetic fuel. And if Porsche wants to create that electricity to create the synthetic fuel at essentially 0 CO2. So if there was an agenda at play, you'd think the European Union would be like, Porsche, thank you so much. You saved the planet, because now the millions, the hundreds of millions or billions of vehicles already on the road, we don't need to, kind of force and pay people to change into electric vehicles. They'll just use your synthetic fuel. You've saved the day, Porsche. No, the European Union goes, hey, we have an agenda. We're politicians. We're not going to get paid for your crap. We're getting paid a lot of money for this EV agenda. It also allows us to have a whole lot more control on you as the masses, because we can just say, you know what, the people over there seem unhappy with us, and it looks like they're going to come and, block Parliament, cause troubles, even maybe violence. Let's just neutralize their vehicles. And guess what? Your vehicles spy on you even more than your cell phone now. Also, not conspiracy, fact.
That's scary and interesting at the same time, that information.
And, if I continue with this, if I had millions of followers, I think it's horrible that, horrible. I'm not going to assume I know things, but sometimes, you look at Russell Brand, he's now been accused of 4 sexual assaults, but, from when he was an actor. So 10 to 15 years ago? Why didn't it come out earlier? Why has it come out now that he's had a YouTube channel, has millions, 6.5 million followers, and regularly points out when governments aren't making sense? He's also very anti-big government. He's more about small governments because, I think he probably holds the opinion that big governments don't always have your best interest. And he points out how they don't always have your best interest. And he talks about laws that make absolutely no sense when you look at the facts. And now all of a sudden, this comes out. So back to the UAW strike, because that was truly an somewhat on-topic rant, because all this trouble is caused by electric vehicles. because that's why the big three can't just say yes to their demands. Because the UAW demands, by the way, are, when you think about it, very reasonable. They're reasonable if you take out the survivability and what needs to be done out of the equation. What needs to be done is tens of billions of dollars towards EV vehicles. So what their demands are, we're talking about Auto Workers Union would add more than $80 billion to each of the biggest US automakers' labor costs. Now, big numbers aside, they want to present this, the news source that was talking about this just wants to present it so it sounds like it's completely unreasonable, because they also go on to say internal calculations see labor costs rising to $150 an hour, according to the Bloomberg. So of course Bloomberg is pro, billionaire capitalism, that, the few people at the top of a company will make, $20 million a year, and that shareholders will make a lot of money. Bloomberg isn't too worried generally as a news source. They're not too worried about the little guy whose sweat, blood, and tears goes into the product. So, they're pointing out the $80 billion in costs and the $150 an hour because, well, they kind of hope that people won't side with the auto workers. I don't think it's necessarily about siding with one side or another. It's about seeing what the numbers tell us and what the numbers will allow as a fair result. Because they bring up really good points. They're asking for 40%, but that's 40% over 4 years. So 10% a year. So they want a little bit more than inflation. Is asking for a little bit more than inflation seem fair? Well, when you consider that inflation since the 1970s has in no way followed the cost of living, that's when you start to see it's a little more fair. From the 1970s, from 1969, 1970, inflation and wages have gone up by 10. So they've been fair. It's followed. But the cost of living has gone up by so much more. Houses times 20. Rent times 20 some. 29, 28, 28, 29 times higher. Food, I think it's more than the tenfold of inflation and wages. So inflation and wages have followed each other. But when the UAW president says the American dream is dead, he's saying it because he's looking back to the 1930s and he's comparing cost of living versus what people were getting paid. And he knows, and he's right, they haven't followed. It's just facts. It doesn't mean that, we need to look at this purely from a what's fair and what's not fair and try to make a decision based on what's fair, because what's fair is that they get their demands. But you've got the head of Ford, and you've got, basically all three automakers clearly saying, even Mark Fields, the ex-CEO of Ford, saying that's going to cause a bankruptcy. I'm going to tell you why they might actually be not just BSing. I'd say don't be fooled. I think if all the demands do get met, it could cause a bankruptcy because of the money that needs to be spent on EVs. So my rant tonight
was a good rant,
it
I guess.
fits. It's a truthful rant.
For once, it's not a rant about steaks, so
it's not a random.
That's good.
It's not a random rant. I didn't tell people to Google "do men menstruate" into Google and see what answer Google gives them, because that'll also actually help show you that there's an agenda at play with major corporations. When you only have a few companies truly controlling, you've got BlackRock and Vanguard basically controlling over 80% of all the companies on the globe, on the whole entire earth. So when BlackRock, and they've come out, the president of BlackRock has come out and said, look, we want society and companies to work like this. If you don't follow along as a CEO, you won't get your bonus and you will be replaced. So for the fun of it, after or during the show, Google, "do men menstruate?" It seems like a pretty easy biological thing that we all know whether men menstruate or not. But Google will give you a very important lesson, whether you agree with Google or not. But Google has even taken a stand, and soon Google is going to If you if you try to look for certain types of information on Google, it's going to be like Facebook. They're just going to say, "Oh, that's unverified." So you don't get to know about that. They'll just say unverified. Basically, you'll treat it like crazy conspiracy stuff and say, "You know what? You're not mature, old enough as a 55-year-old to be reading different perspectives than the current agenda that we want you to follow." So let's focus on not so much what's fair, let's focus on what is doable. So focusing in on what's doable. Fain has told CNN that we're ready for the strike to last as long as it takes. He said that on the picket line in Warren, Michigan. That was early Friday morning. Negotiations on Saturday obviously did not resolve anything. So now on the side of the manufacturers, the problem is that while they have made record profits, and yes, in the billions of dollars per year the last few years, they are forced by the current administration to switch to electric vehicle sales, or they will close. And I'll tell you why they'll close, and they're going to close their doors because of bankruptcy, and that's, like we said earlier, that's caused by carbon taxes. So here's what's going on. Here's really what's going on. If you don't meet your miles per gallon fleet average requirement put on you, on the company, if you don't meet that overall average, here's your mark for 2023, here's your mark for 2025, this is how many miles per gallon you have to be at for 2030, which by 2030 it basically makes it so that it makes it very difficult to be selling a current vehicle that runs on petrol, unless it's in very small volume and you sell a whole lot of electric vehicles to bring down your overall average. So right now what happens, we've talked about it in the last year a couple times, Stellantis, for example, owes several $billion per year, and they face billions of dollars per year in fines, essentially. Let's just call it what it is. It's fines. It's money that you'd have to spend to the government unless you give Tesla money. So you buy carbon credit taxes. So you've been a bad boy. You're Stellantis, and you're making some big, meaty V8s, giving off a lot of noise, and you're creating a lot of carbon while you go down the Jersey Turnpike at 120 miles per hour. So speed actually creates a whole lot more carbon than speeding heavily creates a whole lot more carbon. But anyways, they have to give billions of dollars to Tesla. It makes Tesla have record profits. It also allows Tesla to lower the prices on their electric vehicles, making it even harder for the manufacturers who aren't Tesla to compete and to survive. Every year they don't get on the electric vehicle train and start selling tons of electric vehicles is a year closer to their demise. Now, let's talk about how many electric vehicles are getting sold. GM only has 6% of the EV market. Ford only has 5% of the EV market. Tesla has a little over 60% of the EV market. And the government has poised it so that Tesla has a huge advantage and continues to have a huge advantage, because while Ford continues to offer us a 5-liter V8 in the F-150, and Stellantis wants to do their best to offer us fun, throaty V8s, it's killing them. It's killing them because it's causing them to send billions of dollars to Tesla, and then Tesla can do what? Lower prices, making it even harder to compete with Tesla. So that's the reality of what's going on here. So all this means they need to spend billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars on EV technology right now. Otherwise, they get forced out of the game because Tesla will become more and more competitive, and they'll have less and less money to jump into the EV game because they'll have been giving money to Tesla. So it's a vicious circle swirling around the toilet, counterclockwise if you're in the southern hemisphere, clockwise if you're in the northern hemisphere. But that turd That is automobile manufacturers that don't have a majority of their vehicles being electric vehicle sales. And that turd, which is sending money, it's sending money so that Tesla can flush you down the toilet. But, this isn't Tesla's fault. And I have nothing against Elon Musk. Actually, I have a lot of respect for Elon Musk. He does incredible things. He has incredible technology. I own a good amount of Tesla stocks. And I think it's impressive how he does two things that's pretty incredible for the legacy automakers and really all automakers. One, he open sources, meaning he allows people to copy his information, his patents for certain things, and for other things such as full self-driving, as he's called it, he's going to be wanting to sell that to the legacy automakers at a price, and at a price that won't be about running them out of business. He wants the legacy automakers to survive. He seems to give a lot of respect to, the legacy makers, especially Ford. He's doing what he can so that, Ford, I'm convinced from what I've seen in quotes and actions that Elon Musk really wants the legacy makers to be making electric vehicles and to survive. He's not out to try to have the entire piece of the pie. But I think he does realize that he can't have his entire business model about selling vehicles to China, because China at any point can just decide, oh, well, Tesla, you're not allowed to drive on these roads because you could potentially be spying on things, which is horrifically comical, because we all know that a lot of Chinese technology, such as Chinese cell phones, did spy on us. We also know about billions of dollars worth of patents being stolen from American companies, and it was linked to the Chinese government. They tried to play it off, but you know what? When you're in a Chinese military, when the entire floor is rented out by the Chinese military, and it's that floor that the hack originated at, it's kind of hard to say that it's not you. So I'm here to say the things, to really try to speak the truth, even as I know it, even if that means that likely at some point YouTube will not want to be suggesting my material to anyone. But I don't care. I want to get out what needs to be said. So GM says Kansas plant may run out of parts by next week due to the strike. So you might soon be hearing about, a couple thousand GM workers being laid off. 600 Ford workers have already been laid off because some of the factories are intertwined. And I don't know if they're going to start saying, oh, well, we'll close half of the factory. We'll take some of the workers out of the factory. Well, there's so much of the production and assembly process is intertwined that this is going to cause layoffs. That, or Ford and GM would just be paying people to sit there and be like, well, we're sorry, paint team, the sheet metal didn't come in, so you've got nothing to paint. They're not going to tell them to sit around. They're going to lay people off, even though this means it opens them up to a lot of potential lawsuits, some big lawsuits. So General Motors told workers at its Fairfax plant in Kansas that the factory would soon run out of parts due to the UAW's targeted strike of its Wenzel, Missouri plant. So you've got GM very clearly saying, guess what, folks? These plants are intertwined. You may want to only close one down plant, but it could cause another plant or part of another plant to shut down. So more layoffs, which that's kind of rough though. That's not in the auto manufacturer's benefit, because that means the strike money, you've got more people out of work. You've got more factories closed down, but you're only paying for part of it. So that's another reason why when I said this strike is going to be a very long strike, I really do believe that the numbers say that this definitely can be a long strike. And this will be a long strike if they stay really firm on the pay increase. The pay increase, we'll talk about Tesla numbers. We'll get to this in just a moment. But right now, the average Tesla worker gets $44 an hour. And the average UAW line worker currently gets $66 an hour. So what is that, like 33% more pay for UAW workers? Well, Tesla, surprising. But, don't let main media focus on just one thing. I want to tell you about both sides of the story. Tesla workers get stocks as a bonus, as, part of their pay compensation. So apparently there are some Tesla line workers who've become millionaires because of how much their stocks, they've been working there, and it's very, very, you can definitely imagine it. If they've been working there for, 10, 12 years, and they're getting paid out stocks that originally were worth, a few dollars a stock, and now they're worth $450 roughly a stock, you can imagine that if over the years they've accrued a few thousand Tesla, a couple thousand or more Tesla stocks as payment, as part of their pay package, yeah, I can definitely say that I can full-heartedly believe that it's not just apparently, the math dictates that there are some Tesla line workers who have become millionaires, whereas if Ford or GM are paying you stocks, now those stocks generally always go up by the same amount, go down by the same amount. It's like, it's a joke at Ford. I buy Ford stocks when they're at 12 Canadian. I buy them when they go down by 20 to 30%, and then I make my 20 to 30%, and I just do that over and over.
It stays always at the same.
It always goes down, and then it always goes up, and then it always goes down. It's nonstop. And it's nonstop unless the company goes bankrupt. And Jim Farley has said that meeting all the demands could cause a bankruptcy. Mark Fields, ex-CEO of Ford, I believe from 2014 to 2017, if my memory serves me correctly, also said, watch out. These demands could cause a bankruptcy. So that is what's going on. Let's see what the UAW president has to say, and why I feel this is political. This is about class warfare. Trump has said that he's doing a bad job. I don't know. I think that he's doing a great job at going after what's fair. They gave up a lot, and they want to get back. They want some compensation so that they can afford. Workers have said it before. We can't afford the vehicles we make. And that's, some people might think like, oh my goodness, but they're making, $66 an hour already. That's incredible. Remember, these people have to live in cities where the cost of living, rent or housing is 5-6 times higher than what it is in the rural areas. I've joked before with Marie saying, hey, I'd make an extra maybe $20,000 a year working in Montreal, but our home in the greater city area, we've got like a $4 million home, $5 million home in the greater city area. In the GTA area, Greater Toronto area, we've got, a $6 million, $7 million
That's crazy. The
home.
price there is totally crazy.
In Vancouver, in any of the city centers, heck, we've got like a $10-15 million home. It makes no sense. Whereas in the rural areas, where our home is worth a heck of a lot less. So remember, $66 an hour. Yes, they are asking for a pay increase, 40% for 4 years, so 10% a year. That helps not just cover inflation, but also cover the much higher increase in the cost of living. We all know, we saw groceries go up by 35% in 1 year. Mm. They want to be able to eat. They want to be able to drive a vehicle to get to work. They want to be able to to buy what they build. And they did give up a lot in 2008, 2009. But Tesla workers aren't bad either, getting paid in Tesla stock. Okay, so let's hear what I think we need to hear to fully understand. This is about a bit of class warfare at play. And this makes me think of the socialist movements in the 1930s.
Des ingénieurs construisent des solutions qui rendent notre monde meilleur.
I'm sorry about that. That was pretty loud in a commercial. We don't need a commercial right now.
Economic realism we're facing is that those people buy $2 and $3 and $4 million mansions and just keep on going. and everybody else suffers. They scrape to get by, paycheck to paycheck. That doesn't move an economy. You know, talking heads can say what they want about a strike and how it affects the economy. The economy don't move when workers don't have purchasing power. You got to put money in the pockets of the people. That's what moves the economy. More billionaires is not going to move the economy.
Sean, you did say the White House separated in a statement today. What are you going to do?
So here's the thing. He's saying that, you know, this is about getting the money back from the billionaires. But here's the problem. It's about negotiating. You know, we're getting mixed up. A lot of emotion, I think, is getting into this. Because, yeah, I think a lot of us would agree that we don't need, you know, multi-billionaires buying their, and he says 3-4 houses, try, you know, 10-15, try 3-4 private jets, try yachts that, you know, cost $50 million or $100 million or $300 million. No, we don't need to have people, you know, there are other people who can run companies that don't need to be paid, you know, in this case, it's not hundreds of millions of dollars, but, you know, I think Jim Farley's done a good job. I think he's a good guy. Can you find someone else for less than $20 million per year that'll do a good job? It's hard to say, but I can say that trying to go after, you know, trying to base your argument on the point that, well, there's billionaires and it doesn't make any sense and it's not fair, there needs to be more money. I don't see that as a union president's job. And maybe this is why President Trump was saying he's not doing a good job. Because whereas he's right, the question is, even though he's right, is it his job to try to be going after the billionaires' money? That's maybe a sign of a broken system or something that needs to be fixed in the system. But that's not what you're here to do. You're here to negotiate a contract and get people working. Because, you know, $500 a week when you're on strike, that's garbage. You can't live on $500 a week. Yes, we need to have fair wages. Yes, I think they probably do need to get paid more money, but it's about negotiating something where the company still survives, because Tesla becomes more competitive every year, and Tesla's already paying their workers a lot less, 33% less money. And Tesla is winning by far the EV game when they're, you know, where they're selling a little over 60%, basically 60% of the EV vehicles. And the governments are forcing the sale of EV vehicles. You can't just produce them, you also have to sell them, because you have to have that fleet average for miles per gallon low enough to avoid the billions of dollars in fines or the billions of dollars that you spend buying carbon credits from Tesla. The system right now is rigged against legacy automakers. They have to get that tens of billions of dollars into there. So, you know, on Friday, UAW workers walked out of the 3 plants, one from each of the big 3 automakers, including Ford and Stellantis as well. GM's strike began at its Wentzville, Missouri plant, which has 3,600 UAW members and staff. There's a total of 12,700 on strike right now. And, you know, the UAW president, though, makes it clear that they're willing to have more on strike. So I'll show you where this kind of seems like this isn't going to get resolved easily, because it's not as if they can't pay all the workers because, you know, Jim Farley says, you know what, I'll take $3 million per year instead of 20. Or, you know, GM's CEO, if she starts taking, you know, if she reduces her salary by 10 or, you know, by 5, that doesn't free up the money that's needed to get these people paid. Doesn't fix the problem. Trying to fix a system in which billionaires continue to become richer, and he's right, you know, billionaires do become richer, the rich are becoming richer, and there's fewer rich people, but they're far richer than they ever have been in any point in history. Mind you, the middle class is also wealthier than it ever has been and has more than it ever has. Also worked more hours than it ever has. But the middle class is shrinking, and these are points that he does bring up. So let's cover that.
Back then, this country's a lot different than it was back then. The auto industry's a lot different than it was back then.
Now be seeing this new chapter for the union. I mean, you guys made history.
It's a great honor. I mean, it's getting back to our roots. You know, I mean, obviously the union's a lot different than it was back then. This country's a lot different than it was back then. The auto industry's a lot different than it was back then. But you know, it's I'm not going to lie to anybody. I mean, when I walk in the door, a lot of times when I walk into meetings, I think of all my grandparents. All four of them at one time worked in the Big Three. Three of them retired from the Big Three. So it's an honor, and a lot of what I do is leaning on the things they taught me growing up, and that I learned from that generation growing up. And we got to get back to that path. You know, they lived the American dream, and that's what's been dead in this country for a long time. The middle class keeps shrinking, the wealthy class keeps growing, and that's what our fight's about. It's about economic justice for the entire working class. It's about getting back to a country where we have an American dream. Because right now, that American dream has been dead.
Sir, if you're locked out, how will you?
Pour profiter de la
So sorry about commercials being way louder than the actual interview. So you've got it right there. It's class warfare. He said the American dream is dead, and I watched obviously the whole speech that he was giving, or the questions he was answering. Really, he's not giving a speech, but it wasn't far from it. He was answering questions, but he goes on to say that they're fighting for the whole middle class. The thing is, it's not his job, and this is why, until someone tells him that's not your job, and it doesn't look like the Biden administration is going to be telling him that's not your job. The Biden administration, as we said, was basically saying like, hey, big manufacturers, you need to pay up. And they're going on the emotional argument. But until this becomes an argument about numbers, and they crack out the numbers and they say, look, this is what we're going to be investing. This is what we foresee making. This is the money that gets left over. How much of that money do you expect? There's got to be some left over for shareholders. So how much do you expect? And that's the type of negotiation that needs to be done. It needs to be all about numbers and not about emotions. And someone really does need to remind everyone, let's take emotions out of this, because emotions could run the companies into the ground. Obviously, I think that the people that make the product probably deserve all of the profit. It's their work. I'm a shareholder of Tesla. I'm a shareholder of Ford. I don't really do anything to make that money. I don't deserve it. I've worked really hard in life to get to where I am, to be able to invest, but now I'm doing nothing and getting stuff for it. I don't deserve that money. The people that put their blood, sweat, and tears, and that includes the CEOs who get paid based on meeting performance objectives, helping helping with the survival and profitability of the company, they're also getting paid for their blood, sweat, and tears. Let's not forget that it's not easy having thousands of workers who, just imagine, it's hard enough being in charge of 10 or 20 workers with all the different aspects of emotions and everything that can come out of dealing with human beings who are generally far more emotion than they are logical. And most human beings, especially when we're worked up, aren't going to look at both sides of the argument and say, I understand your point of view. Here's mine. Can we find a compromise? Can you see the validity in my point of view? Because I see the validity in your point of view. So can we work something out? No. When you're a boss, people say things like, I'll put you through the wall. It's not easy being a boss. Sometimes people are crying. Sometimes people are, being violent. It's tough. So everyone needs to be rewarded for their blood, sweat, and tears. But a lot of the money, guess what? It goes back to shareholders. And well, that's the system we live in. And there's not going to be a contract that gets worked out when someone's focusing on the fact that, hey, it's not fair that shareholders are getting all this profit and we're not, because we did the work. If that's your perspective, you're never going to get along with and find an agreement with the CEOs who are there to keep the company running, surviving Tesla, surviving Chinese vehicles coming in. being forced into this EV, this huge EV push. So yes, this all started off with UAW President Fain saying that the automakers' demands are an insult. Some say that he burnt the contract. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Did he burn the contract or did he just throw it in the garbage? Did he tear it up and throw it in the garbage? One way or another, they're not getting along, and they've got the money to not get along for a very long period of time. And the big three got yards filled with vehicles. They've had to put rebates on them because inventory is high. It's not going to be that horrible if inventory goes down, but right now only a few plants, one plant closed, one major plant closed for each automaker. For now, I think probably the threats being made is we'll close down the big truck companies, the big truck factories. The 1500, the F-150. But guess what? There's a lot of inventory of big trucks right now. And we could see some rebates go away. And if we do, I'd say order it and hope that your vehicle comes in when the rebates are back. But for now, we've got good rebates. The rebates haven't been touched by this strike. Still $3,750 off a Ford. GM has the same rebates they had at the beginning of the month, which are very similar to the rebates they had last month. And same thing for Stellantis. So if you're looking for a truck, say play it safe, buy one now. And traditionally, used prices for your trade-in values are going to go down they're going to go down more and more as we approach winter, and they're going to be at a all-time low during the winter months. Even last year, during the used vehicles being paid at auction, and hopefully the dealers were passing that on to customers, but being paid at auction 43% higher. They still died off in the winter. Heck, my F-150 Raptor that I bought in October was worth $10,000 less in the winter months, and then come spring it bounced back up $5,000, which I held on. I waited. I treated my truck like a stock, and then I sold it when it was worth more come spring. So that's all my advice to help save you thousands of dollars. Right now, they are saying that the strike will cost $400 to $500 million per week in production. That's what was being said, but in the end, they didn't close off. GM didn't pull all its workers. Ford hasn't pulled off its workers. So right now it's costing a lot less than that. In 2019, when GM did go on strike, 6,000 workers in Mexico were laid off. But right now, I'd say that if you're waiting on a Ford Maverick, it won't affect Ford Maverick production. If some other factories get closed that maybe build parts for the Ford Maverick, it could definitely slow down Ford Maverick production. They could maybe have to stop. But right now, it looks like it's going to be a rotating closure to this.